Hi, everybody. I think we're going to get started. I'm sorry. Sorry for the interruptions. There will be plenty of time for chatting later. Everybody can hear me, see everything okay, right? Great. I'm Jacob Moore. I'm the executive director of the Architectural League. And before handing it off to tonight's speakers, I just wanted to begin with a few words of thanks. First, to the gracious hosts here at Cooper, and especially to Acting Dean Haley Eber and Mauricio Higuera. And then to the whole league team, many of whom are here tonight, but especially to Anne Rieselbach, Zoe Fruchter, and Damasi Darby Washington, the programs team. It's a lot of work to pull these events together, and they do it expertly. This program forms part of our current work series, which is supported in part by public funds from the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, in partnership with the City Council and by the New York State Council of the Arts, with the support of the Office of the Governor and the New York State Legislature. Another current work event coming up, which is cycling here, is Capping Highways Transforming Infrastructure on April 24th at Pratt. So please join us for that. And then beyond tonight and beyond current work, absolutely none of the work that we do would be possible without the support of Architectural League members, inspiration, audience, and collaborators for all that we do. So if you're not already a member, I encourage you to look into that and join up. You can find all the information online. And one members only event coming up, we do after hours, which is gatherings at different firms or public agencies. We have Leroy Street coming up on March 20th, and then on April 17th, Curtis and Ginsburg is hosting us, which is many of you probably know their work, but they focus on affordable and supportive housing, so relates to the work we're going to hear about from Anna tonight. So briefly on that, a few words about tonight's program. As we sit here on ancestral Lenape homelands, the violent interplay of settlement and displacement continues all across the planet. Genocide, climate-driven migration, and mass deportation, now entwined with levels of income and wealth inequality not seen since the Gilded Age, are hard present truths to be reckoned with and resisted by successive generations as we chart a path, as we say in the League's mission, toward a more livable and just world. In that context, housing is simultaneously one of the most intimate and most universal elements of the built environment. It shapes not only how, with whom, and where we live, questions which I know we're going to hear a lot more about tonight. More fundamentally, it can also determine if we live at all. And here in this city, with a legal right to shelter, we should feel emboldened to assert housing as a human right. And especially given the aforementioned 21st century context of intensifying population shifts all around the globe, the enforcement of this right will require more than an engaged private market. It will require the state. So to help us think through some of the possibilities for the architecture of social housing today, we have an absolutely stellar speaker and moderator. I'll introduce our moderator, who will then introduce our speaker. So Karen Kuby is a New York and Toronto-based urbanist specializing in housing design and spatial justice. She is the editor of Housing as Intervention, Architecture Towards Social Equity from 2018, and served as the first executive director of the Institute for Public Architecture. QB co-founded the New York chapter of Architecture for Humanity, which is now called Open Architecture New York, and co-founded and led the New Housing New York design competition. She holds degrees from UC Berkeley and Columbia GSAP, has taught in numerous institutions, and convenes the American Institute of Architects Right to Housing Working Group. So along with Anna, Karen is also a friend, so I'm really happy that they're both able to be here tonight. And I'll pass it to Karen, who can introduce Anna, but I'm really grateful that you're all here and enjoy the show.
Last night, on my flight from Toronto to New York, I sat next to a resident of Regent Park, a complex of public and market rate housing in Toronto. He told me, "I wish people would come and visit us. Then they would see that this public housing neighborhood is a vibrant community." talking with me about how much he loves living in Regent Park, how the park and public aquatic center bring together Torontonians of all races and classes, how the creation of well-designed, affordable homes has not only improved the lives of those who live in them, but has also produced a safe, welcoming, active neighborhood for all. My seatmate understood the potentials for social housing. He understood the need to share good information to combat public misconceptions, to expand social housing, as Jacob has said, to realize housing as a right. We must share visions of a more just future. We must uncover historical examples of collective living and the architecture that supports it. We must design and build beautiful social housing, both for those who live there and to show what is possible. And we must engage with residents and with the next generation of architects or students today. In the fight for the right to housing and social housing, Anna Puigjaner is a triple threat. I cannot overemphasize the power of her combined practice of in-depth research and editorial work, forward-looking design, and productive engagement in academia. As Jacob mentioned, I'm Karen Kuby. I'm a Hauser based here and in Toronto, and I'm assistant professor at the Daniels faculty at the University of Toronto. And tonight, I have the distinct honor of introducing to you Anna Puigjaner. I first came to know Anna's work through her project Kitchenless City, which she's been working on now for 14 years. Kitchenless City, which Anna will share today, explores a time in the United States when collective housekeeping policies shaped housing typologies and urban growth to shrink domestic expenses. At that time, housing was understood as a tool for social and urban transformation. For this project, she received the 2016 Wheelwright Prize from Harvard GSD. This was a $100,000 travel grant to connect the U.S. research with contemporary forms of collective living from around the world. The project has also been supported by the Graham Foundation. And I thought I knew a thing or two about housing history, but this feminist research absolutely blows me away. If we've done it before, we can do it again. And also, I will move in immediately. In 2015, Puigjaner founded MAIO, a multidisciplinary architecture firm based in Barcelona, with partners Maria Tarnico, Alfredo Lerida, and Guillermo Lopez. Combining design work with academic research and editorial projects, MAIO operates as a collaborative studio. The firm's work has been exhibited at the Museum of Modern Art, the Max Center for Art and Architecture, the Royal Academy, Storefront for Art and Architecture, and at the Venice Biennale, among other venues. MAIO has recently produced 40 social housing units building. This is a 4-story residence in suburban Barcelona that contains 40 units composed of generic spaces designed to be adaptable to the changing needs of inhabitants. Flexibility is a critical quality for housing to be able to last generations. I'm looking forward to learning more about this project, which addresses what I believe are the most important issues of housing for our time. Anna's approach to academic work is also unique. At ETH Zurich, she is professor of architecture and care. Care has been at the center of Anna's work long before as a buzzword in our discipline. She approaches the topic with curiosity and incredible dedication. Before joining ETH, Anna taught at Columbia GSAP, at London's Royal College of Arts, and at the Barcelona School of Architecture. She received her BArch, MArch, and PhD degrees from Escola Técnica Superior de Arquitectura de Barcelona, Universitat Politécnica de Catalunya. How's that? My heroine from history is Catherine Bauer, who from the 1930s to 60s improved housing in the United States through exhibitions, publications, policy work, and teaching. Anna Puigjaner is a modern-day Catherine Bauer. While her skills and her ways of working are different, she offers a similarly multivalent practice with the power to change the course of history of housing. As my flight seatmate told me last night, we must expand social housing. and we must shift culture around housing. There is no more exciting practice in housing today than Anna's with MAIO, which we'll get to hear about in her lecture, and then we'll talk over there, and then we'll take questions from you. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Anna Puigjaner. Please join us on stage.
Well, thank you very much for coming today. First, obviously, I want to thank the opportunity to the league, to Jacob, to Anne, to the whole team, to allow me to be here with you, all of you today. Also to Copper to host the event. And it has been 3 years since I left New York. I thought I left New York and I would be back in 3 months. Time goes very fast, but when I landed, I felt I was at home again, and it felt like yesterday. Sorry for that. So I'm very happy to see a lot of familiar faces in the audience. I miss you a lot. And for those that you know the work, for those that you don't know me and you don't know the work of MAIO, I brought a little bit of the beginnings and a little bit of what we do around housing. But for those that you know me well, I brought the work that we have done the last years. So I hope for all of you to be of interest. So MAIO is a practice, a collaborative practice that was set up in 2012, right after the economic crash in Barcelona, Spain. And somehow, probably because of that context, we have been always critical with the architectural knowledge and ways of doing that we have inherited. And precisely because we find that them have perpetuate social biases, in particular when looking to housing. Most of our housing stock market in Spain, and that reality could be paired with other territories, is defined by this typology addressed to the nuclear family, and by that I refer a family composed by a couple of parents and a couple, 1 or 2 kids. And it's represented through the space arrangement in the form of having a large living room where the family is supposed to meet, a larger bedroom for usually called master bedroom, and then a set of smaller bedrooms for the kids. And not only it's problematic because in Spain, less than 30% of our population can be classified under that family structure, meaning that more than 70% is left out, but also because it perpetuates certain behaviors and certain power hierarchies within family structures. Obviously, here I'm referring to heteronormativity, how that is reinforced through a spatial design. And that happens precisely because our housing laws do invite architects. I'm using the term inviting, but I could say pushes us to build like that. So architects, developers, and policymakers do continue designing and promoting that typology. So the first building that we built in, it's a project from 2013, and it was a competition for a private development of 20 housing units in Barcelona. And we took that opportunity to explore more inclusive domestic spaces able to host wider social and family realities. And the building is placed in Eixample, which is a neighborhood defined. It's a neighborhood from the 19th century that is clearly defined by this eternal, like this homogeneity, is a homogeneous grid that we always have fascinated by the fact that despite the homogeneity and the order, a lot of heterogeneity and disorder can be contained within. And we always have been fascinated also by the fact that it has been extremely resilient and sustainable in a way, because it was a housing neighborhood that changed easily to host offices later on, and nowadays back again housing, without changing a lot its physiognomy. And its capacity to change through time happened thanks to the fact that the original typology, it's the one that was mostly used in the 19th century and occupied most of the tissue, is this one. And what is interesting is to see how, from our modern perspective and way to look to things, it's very difficult to distinguish where was the living room, the bedroom, or the bathroom, for instance, because the size of the spaces and the rooms are some sort of similar. And that actually facilitated this capacity to change through time. So we wanted to, as a reenactment, we wanted to find a size of domestic space that not only would satisfy the legal frameworks, but also would be able to host different domestic programs. So with this, what we wanted to do is not to predetermine the domestic program and to allow inhabitants to determine where the living room, bedrooms, and so on could be placed. So the rooms initially were set up in 5 rooms apartments setting. The kitchen could be placed in any of the rooms, thanks to the fact that we placed 2 bathrooms strategically in a position that allow all rooms to have a physical connection with them, and that facilitated the kitchen even to be placed anywhere. So we didn't even predetermine where the kitchen was placed. With that, we allow bedrooms, living rooms, and different domestic programs to be changed depending on the needs, the inhabitant needs. And we call it 110 rooms because the rooms also were arranged in a way that would allow apartments to enlarge and decrease through time. Again, you have to contextualize the project in a moment after the economic crash, in which there was a lot of family restructurings, in which we encounter an aging society that couldn't keep up with their apartments. And we found that capacity to change through time, a tool to satisfy larger changes in social needs. And this actually, this capacity to add and subtract rooms was, again, a reenactment, but in this case to a typology that was quite common in most of U.S. cities at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century. But I researched just those that happened in New York, and by that, sincerely, I mean Manhattan. And it's a story of kitchenless housing type that I ended up being my PhD that I finished in 2014, and I titled Kitchenless City. And it was a moment in New York after the Civil War, 1865, that there was a lot of need of new housing stock due to massive migrations from rural areas to the city, but also the fact that there was a stop in the housing market for a period of time and more motifs. So there was the need to design new collective housing typologies. And on top of that, due to the first industrial revolution, we had a massive incorporation of women into, due to the second industrial revolution, we have a massive incorporation of women into industrial labor, but also, as you can imagine, the abolition of slavery. Both phenomena had a large impact on how care labor was being done until then. And among other proposals, it came up a set of projects that understood that through collectivizing and industrializing care spaces and labor, it could provide a possible solution. And obviously, these cases kind of consciously or unconsciously were linked to philosophers that had a lot of impact on the US at that time. And here I'm referring to Robert Owen, but also Charles Fourier or Saint-Étienne, a story that those of you that you're into housing, you might have in mind, a very famous book of Dolores Hayden, in which she actually traced this impact on the US of these philosophical tendencies, but also the importance of the material feminist that also got influenced by them and had a large impact on the end of the 19th century. But my PhD focused just on this commercial kitchenless typology that didn't have anything to do with the material feminists at the time, or at least they didn't want to acknowledge that. And I start pulling out hundreds of cases of kitchenless apartments, and it was very interesting to discover that exist in between 1871 and 1929, when it started the decay. And it's very interesting to see the broad diversity of them. So we could find very small apartments, the lack of kitchens, with low rents, to extremely luxurious ones. Here we have the Astor apartment house that had 2 apartments per floor, very broad types of rooms, but no kitchens at all. So that talks a little bit about the spectrum of types of inhabitants. And among other assets, it was considered by developers a quite interesting thing to have, to provide some sort of flexibility in the surface of their apartments at the verge of the 19th towards the 20th century. So suddenly these apartments facilitated this capacity to change through time, and it proved, economically speaking, extremely beneficial. So I excuse myself because I realized I sent the wrong PowerPoint, so I'm skipping a lot of slides, not to be too long. Images, very beautiful. Ground floor. So the ground floor, it's again a reenactment of the housing type of example of that time, in which collectivity, the representation of collectivity, both through space quality and materiality, was represented. And that's why we use marbles, and we got the best through shaping these marbles through this shape that pretended to get the most of the space. And we allow the visibility of a beautiful garden at the back from the street, and the other way around. And in the courtyard, we we open the courtyard to the sky to allow a wind tunnel to be generated and to refresh the apartments thanks to the humidity of the garden that would be brought inside in summertime. And these are, for instance, techniques that we developed further when, luckily, years after, we won another competition to build social housing blocks in the outskirts of the city of Barcelona in Sant Feliu that finished a year and a half ago. And there we explore, we keep on working on inclusive housing typologies, but we explore further economy of means, but with a particular scope on cutting down expenses, not only in construction, but also in maintenance and consumes afterwards. So that's why, among other reasons, the building is very compact, to avoid losing heating in winter, but also gaining heating in summer. And you have to also And the building is very compact also because when we talk about collective social housing, we have to be aware that social housing as collective housing is very contextual. And it differs enormously from other types of collective housing. It differs enormously from private developments, for instance, but it differs enormously from cooperative housing, for instance. And in this case, our social houses are temporarily offered for 7 years to support temporarily the economy of citizens. And the rents are related not only with salaries, but they are related also with services. And in our case, the housing department, the public housing department, but also the city council really wanted to provide a lot of small and therefore affordable units. So that's why it's so compact as well. And as you see, there's some sort of similarity with the previous project that I explained, 110 rooms. And in this case, the innovation is this 6-room that we call it, that could become an interior and exterior room as an extended balcony. And the fact that we reduce the bathrooms to one and we subdivide it to provide much more flexibility, cutting down, for instance, cost in water and electric consume afterwards, apart from construction cost. And here, as you see, the entrance is here, the kitchen is placed in the first room. And as it happened in 110 rooms, we didn't predetermine the domestic program. So legally speaking, these are apartments of 2 bedrooms, but legally speaking can be occupied by 3 bedrooms. And that was something considered of value when you're dealing with vulnerable families that tend to have a lot of mobility in their family structures, and therefore their changing needs of a space to change a lot. So in this case, bedrooms can be placed on one side, in 2 opposite sides on 3 of the rooms, and the other way around. The living room can be placed just limited in these 2 small rooms, or 3 in diagonal, 3 like this, or 3 like this. And as you see, all windows are exactly the same size, to get the same amount of light and ventilation. We do that because, therefore, legally speaking, actually every room can be legally the living room, which is the room that requires more surface of ventilation and lighting in the law, in the housing law. And you might question, or you might be asking, how actually, if the legal housing framework pushes us to promote the same typology, how did we make it to generate a typology that lacks of a spatial hierarchy in it? And we did it because we are fascinated by laws. We read them very carefully and we use them as design tools. And we found a loophole. It's not that we are doing illegal things, and we are not encouraging you to do that, but we find loopholes and illegal situations within the law that allow us to push typologies further. So in the law, it says that if you have an opening larger than 1.4 meters, 2 spaces legally can become 1. So always our rooms have 10 square meters, they have large windows, and they have large double doors. So that they can connect the spaces for practical reasons, but also for legal reasons. And we put a lot of attention in how the doors are designed. You see the frames are screwed on the back, so when opening the doors do disappear. Very simple pre-industrial wood door. And we work a lot with these diagonal sequences to get the most of sense of a space. So the apartments are extremely squeezed, but they feel large. And then there are a lot of set of design decisions that we took in order to reduce cost. As you see, the apartments are very whitish. And this, as you can imagine, is to decrease the use of electrical light, but also materials such as the terrazzo tiles provide better repair in the future. And as you see, it's a white terrazzo that has small marks in it. So we work a lot in this project on how to design design aging from day one. So the fact that it looks like already beautifully marked, if it's marked afterwards due to a damage, is not perceived. Or if it's perceived, it's beautifully perceived. It's beautifully perceived. So here we work a lot about how wrinkles, damages can become an aesthetic element of your building. And framing, another tool to increase the perception of a space. And as I was mentioning, these apartments are occupied temporarily. If inhabitants cannot get a better economic situation, they can stay, they can remain. It's not that they are kicked out. But the fact that they are of temporal use, the department doesn't do a previous public participation. So you don't know who's going to live there. And they do that on purpose because there are going to be a lot of changes. So you have to design something that is inclusive for a broad audience. But what they do is they do a post-occupancy process. So as architects, we work with the neighbors for 1 year afterwards, which I saw myself like installing TVs to helping understand the space from a very hands-on things to theoretical talks and on housing typology. And that experience not only allowed the public department to collect things that we did great, things that we did wrong, and those reviews and feedbacks are included in the following public housing call. So it's a very smart way to do public participation through post-occupancy. And I'm explaining this because thanks to that, we have a close relation with inhabitants. And one of the key elements to generate bonding among them, you have a group of citizens that they live there, but it's not like a cooperative housing that you have a group of inhabitants that they're really cheerful to live together. In this case, not everyone wants to relate with the neighbor next door. So there are a lot of design tools to boost social engagement. And one thing that we propose is to, instead of having an opaque door as an entrance door, you enter through a window. So there's not opacity. And that challenged a lot of social constructions and cultural constructions around security. And it's proof, actually, that most of domestic violence, don't happen because of thanks to of a lack of an open door, or they don't happen in the door, let's say, at least in Barcelona. So it is a social cultural construct that we should challenge, because it's thanks to that fact that you have some sort of transparency or the capacity to be transparent to neighbors is a first way or a way to talk to each other. Just by the fact that most of neighbors do cover themselves with curtains, vinyls, and many other elements is a way of language. If you cover fully or if you expose yourself is a way to talk to the others. And it will prove through time a good tool for social engagement. One key element is also this fence that you see in front, not only to achieve security, but it's also a tool to allow the door to be open in summer and to allow this cross ventilation that we work a lot to go through and use the main door as well as an opening for ventilation. And as I was mentioning, this we put a lot of effort to control climate control in this project, especially in this one. And we generate this ground floor has this cut that connects both sides of the building, but also generates this wind channel, bringing the air from the sea to the mountain that goes in this direction, and is captured through this small hole. So we have a large opening and a small opening to generate the wind tunnel. Some images of the ground floor. As you see, again, ground floor and facade do have this materiality that works also about aging and the diminishes of repair. So it's kind of a nice beautiful age color, nice, beautiful age material. this is the wind tunnel, and this is the courtyard that allow this cross ventilation that I was mentioning. So we have a patio, a garden a public park in the back that captures the winds from the sea, humidify them, and bring them indoors for summer cross ventilation. This was supposed, one thing that you face yourself. This space was supposed to open and close, so close in winter and open in summer. Close in winter to act as a winter garden to get heating from the sun, and the other way around. But we couldn't afford it. And actually, surprisingly, despite our engineers' studies, we don't need it. So one of the things also good of this post-occupancy is that we could really control consumes afterwards. So one of the key elements that we did also as a heating system is that most of the building is built with brick because it's actually a cheap material in Spain. And then slabs are concrete as well as columns. And these slabs were designed in a way that they would capture the heat thanks to sun exposure, thanks to these large openings that I was referring before. So we calculated the exposure, the losses, and the heating that we could get, thanks to the fact that these concrete slabs, don't have a false ceiling or any type of insulation, neither above, neither below. So they capture the heating during the day in winter, and they release it during nighttime. And it proved enormously efficient. And then the facade, there was also the will to define some sort of equity, something very important when designing social housing in Barcelona, so that neighbors do feel equal. And it's a building that is placed, despite being very close to the public transport, is placed in the outskirts, right in the middle of an industrial area. So we wanted to provide the building with the capacity to block itself. And this coat or second skin that we designed has this double purpose, right? To block the sun in summer and to avoid the sun to hit these concrete slabs, but also to block the view or to provide privacy to the inhabitants. As you can imagine, this is a very pretentious image. It never happens, meaning that neighbors don't agree to block themselves at the same time. But we wanted to show that as it happened with the car, luckily one day it was parked in front, the building could clothe itself. So the image is more like this one, or even less than the other way around. And then we have been in the ground floor is still empty, unfortunately. We have been working, so the building was occupied 1.5 years ago, and we have been working even before then to host a urban kitchen. It's prepared to host a collective kitchen and a collective laundry apart from different collective spaces, and it's supposed to be managed by the city council and INSOL, which is the Department of Social Housing that we work with. Unfortunately, the conversations are very slow. It's not close, so we still have hope. And we have been researching around what we call urban kitchens. So we call urban kitchens to these care hubs that not only provide care support to inhabitants of the same building, but they are open to the public at large. So they could be paired with libraries or civic centers as we know it. And we think that it's important to once again talk about care spaces and care labor, because if we trace back, every time that we have had an industrial revolution, it has had an impact on housing. We can see, for instance, how at the end of the Enlightenment, beginning of the first industrial revolution, houses started to be detached from working spaces. And it was that time that the binary between housework and outside housework started to emerge, as well as this gender binary division that progressively got defined after that. We see, for instance, as I was mentioned, in the second industrial revolution, due to to the massive incorporation of women into industrial labor, let me be clear here. I'm talking from a Western perspective here. So we have as an answer the incorporation of electric devices and the implementation of efficiency and modern design, functional design, as a tool to solve this critical relation between domestic work and industrial labor. And as we know, it's just something that generates an imaginary around care labor as effortless. But we know nowadays that the amount of hours that we spend on domestic work and care work are exactly the same ones as in the 19th century. So this is important to note. I don't need to explain further, but in the third industrial revolution, here it's very clear in the US, the idea of the nuclear family got reinforced through single housing design. And nowadays we're living the fourth industrial revolution, a moment in which digital technologies are shifting how we inhabit and how we work. I don't need to explain you what is happening. I think it's pretty clear. So once again, we are living in a moment in that care structures are being affected, and consequently care labor. And consequently, that's going to affect the built environment and especially housing. So on one hand, we could argue that we're living in a moment in which extractivist practices are emerging very fast, seeing the opportunity of it. But also, I want to see it as a moment of opportunities and openings to think in more inclusive care spaces and infrastructures. So with that in mind, we have been researching around urban kitchens since 2016, first to the Wheelwright Prize from GSD, later on, thanks to Columbia University, GSAP, and nowadays at ETH Zurich. It's been a collective research. So I acknowledge here Jose Villanueva and Takai Jonzawa from GSAP, who have been working, probably the ones that have been working closer with me for longer, but many other people have been on this research. And we traced 3 cities in which in the last decades, a lot of urban kitchens, as we call them, emerge. They are Lima, Mexico, and Tokyo. We selected them for many reasons. They are very different in context, but they do have in common that they answer to late capitalist crises. Crises around migration, crises around climate change, crisis around global crash economies. And the first case, Lima, is the eldest, and it emerged as due to massive migrations from rural areas to the city of Lima in the late 50s, 60s that facilitated these massive occupations of land. And in a quite binary manner, these communities divided themselves in a gender binary manner. Men went to look for jobs at the city of Lima that was at that time disconnected from these territories, and women remain in the neighborhoods, running the neighborhoods. And by running, I mean leading, building, designing the neighborhoods. So in a quite natural manner, they started to self-organize themselves to acquire food, progressively set up kitchens. But as I was referring, they became leaders of their own neighborhoods by the fact that you see this image, them self-organized, building the sewage system. What is interesting to point out is in the late 70s, there were 2 massive strikes nationally, and these women started to cook for the strikers. And at that time, they started to acquire a political voice. And for me, it's very interesting, this moment in which you have these leaders, cookers, but at the same time, for the first time, politicians set up in quite a political, with a quite architectural political stage. And it's precisely because even if Peru was extremely progressive on gender rights, it was in 1955 that women achieved vote rights, for instance, or access to free education, that didn't mean real access to it. Most of women couldn't afford to have access to it. So these kitchens became political parliaments of women empowerment, and in this case, I'm referring to migrant women empowerment. So what is interesting is that we have been mapping them. There were no list or maps, and we mapped them just to give you a sense of the density of them. These kitchens operate daily. They cook between 300 and 500 menus for lunchtime. They're run by close groups of women, of 15 women, self-organized. They cook in turns of 3. They cook voluntarily based, so they don't get anything economically because they claim that that's capitalist, and they have their jobs aside. So they claim to support the community, and they claim to have they cook to support the community, and they cook to have a political voice. Still nowadays. Just to give you a sense, New York has the same amount of population than, these are maps of Lima, and here we have around 1,500 public schools. Lima has 2,500 public kitchens. They're called comedores populares, just to be precise here. Just to give you a sense of the size of it and the impact. Some of them occupy small spaces, houses, private houses. Some of them are very large, and they became through time almost civic centers, including library, spaces for the kids, and other community spaces support. What is interesting is to see that in 2008, when the economic crisis hit, Marcelo Obran, who was at that time the mayor of the city of Mexico, started a similar program in the city of Mexico called Comedores Comunitarios. In that case, it's a program that is not gender biased. Any kind of gender can participate. Any groups of 3 citizens can, with a larger space than 30 square meters, can apply to the program. And as an answer, the municipality install an industrial kitchen and provides food every 15 days. It's similar to Lima because they cook every day for between 300 and 500 menus. The menu is sold also, as in Lima, is sold with a low price. And with this money, they can afford to pay micro salaries. So it's a tool to generate micro job. Most of them are occupying domestic houses, private houses that are open for few hours a day to the community. As this one, occupying a garage. But others do occupy larger infrastructures, as this one that is led by the elderly. And here, as it is a governmental program, you see a lot of links between department programs and the nature of the kitchen. So you have, for instance, a trans kitchen that works for trans rights, among other programs. Mapping was easy because they're all mapped, they're all online. You can Google. They're very delicious ones, other not that good. So I recommend to Google before going. And what is fascinating is at the same time, more or less, in 2011 in Tokyo, a similar phenomenon happened. In this case, it was answering to, as you can imagine, Fukushima earthquake and the consequential social crisis. And at that time, Tokyo peaked. 50% of the population was living alone. So there was a sense of social loss, and without knowing each other, groups of citizens, most of them elderly, started to cook collectively to support initially children. And that's why they're called Kodomo Shokudo, children cafeterias. And they're liquid in nature because they occupy during dinner time different nature spaces, from kitchens that are collective kitchens already designed for that, but civic centers, izakayas, bakeries, private houses. And it's very interesting to see how they have grown enormously. We stopped counting like 2 years ago or 3 years ago, I think. And nowadays we went back in February and our numbers are completely outdated. So the phenomenon is increasing so rapidly that now the government is establishing some sort of control, and it's been a little bit problematic. So we do this research with the goal to because we are living in a care crisis in Spain, and we can extrapolate that situation to Europe at large. We have an aging population, a scarcity of care workers, and a healthcare system that relies on nuclear families that are not the majority. So So with this in mind, we wanted to expose the research and to promote urban kitchens, public kitchens in the city. So we started with this festival curated, among others, by Eva Frank, who you might know because it's familiar of this house. We asked Eva to design a public kitchen that occupied the center of Barcelona, Plaza Catalunya, for 3 days and invite different activists and artists around food to cook and disseminate ideas. We, on purpose, designed the kitchen to have domestic-less feeling, so it looks like a concert stage. It looks like Sonar, for those that you're into electro music. We actually work with the Sonar installer, so it was the same people. And we invited from cooking sections who prepare these mussels and allow us to think how the practice of eating mussel can have an impact on the cleaning of the Mediterranean Sea, but also on the production of cement. Afterwards, we invited the Lima activists to cook for our audience and explain by themselves their experience running the kitchens in Lima. And we invited waste food activists to show how urban kitchens would decrease a lot the number of waste in the city of Barcelona. So after that one, every time that we receive an invitation to do an exhibition or installation, we capitalize that and design a kitchen. Later on, we receive an invitation to do something in a domestic exhibition created by Nina Basoli in the Triennale de Milano. And we proposed Nina to design a urban kitchen. And that it was the first prototype that we did. And it's a kitchen designed to occupy public space, and it can be easily dismantled and transported. Nowadays, we have it in Zurich, and we use it actively. We offer it to social activists around food and social inclusion to use it. So it's there for public use. When SIBA at Brussels, Nicholas Hertz invite us to activate a Cubex kitchen, which is a modern kitchen widespread in the 30s that influenced a lot Belgium. We embedded this set of gadgets to transgress its normativity. So we embedded gadgets that transgress the individuality of it and turn it into a collective entity, transgress the privacy of it and turn it into a public element, transgress the body normativity and allow a wider diverse of body conformations and mobilities to use it. And lastly, we could manage in this project to design a movable kitchen that is actually occupying the public space of Poble Sec, now temporarily. And it has been a very beautiful project that lasts 3 years. And it started with an invitation to design a theater performance. And we started with that excuse to establish a social network between a union of domestic workers composed by over 55 years old, mostly migrant women in Barcelona, a foundation, Mescladís, that does social inclusion through labor inclusion and cooking, the theater itself that invite us, the civic center, and the municipality. So we started a conversation to understand how the design of this scenography and this performance could understand this temporal, the possibilities of having a social impact that could last larger than just one day of performance. And with that in mind, we designed this kitchen that now is being used by this union, domestic union group to generate micro jobs occupying the public space. And what we did as a performance was just a celebration of it. As a design of the kitchen, we took a prefab. They're so very good. They're such amazing camping kitchen designs that we just work with one of it and transgress it. So if the camping unit was designed for individual cooking. Again, as if we did in Brussels, we designed a set of gadgets to allow collective cooking to happen. So these stainless steel gadgets transgress the small kitchens. And we invite gadgets to connect them, but also to implement huge sinks to be able to wash collectively, also storage space. And then we work with the culture of repentismo. Repentismo is a musical gender that is comes from Latin America, but is very popular also in Spain, and it's based on improvisation of music on public space. And basically, it's a tool to provide political voice to local stories and subaltern bodies. So we invited Kini Martinez Hernandez, an Afro-descendant poet and a feminist, an activist, to give through improvisation the voice of and the stories around the domestic workers. And while the performance was happening, these stories were embedded through food. That food was cooked, and later on we ate it, while also swallowing the words of Kini. And I wanted to bring this. How much time? How much left? 10 minutes. Okay. Amazing set of projects that I will go very fast. Be with me here. So I wanted to bring Timisoara Tower because it was again a temporal project, but we wanted to have a larger impact. So we were invited to design a pavilion to celebrate the capital of culture of Timisoara during 1 year. And we used the budget to buy 1,306 plants and the rest to rent this scaffolding. Timisoara is a city that had a dictatorship that lasted a lot and defined most of its public spaces. And it's very interesting because it has kind of a contested relation with greenery. So on one hand, greenery is hated because it was used as a public control. Greenery was planned to avoid occupation. But on the other hand, is the capital in the world of flower contest. So there's this kind of deep love for greenery and hate at the same time. So that's why we decided to buy plants, but plants that talk about the landscape and the greenery, the culture, the heritage through greenery of the place, but also plants that could allow to be occupied underneath. And when we finished, the plants were not this like this. It was an awful tower. We got a lot of contested opinions, and thanks to that, we were on the media almost every day. As what's going on? Nothing is going on in this scaffolding. Poor plants. And thanks to that, we started what we really wanted to do, to set up a process of public participation and understand the tower as a set of floorings to allow public discussions and to discuss where the plants would go afterwards, because the plants lack of a place afterwards. And the municipality from day one, they wanted to give them. So that was the main will. So it was an excuse to host for 1 year a set of public discussions on how to design public space in the city of Timisoara, reimagining greenery. Obviously, as you can imagine, that has a lot of relation with the actual moment of climate change, but also for them, it had also another political meaning. And what is beautiful of this process is that afterwards of this very intense and contested year, the project is still going on because the plants have been moved and planned to peripheral locations. That for us was very important to have an impact, not on the center where we were placed, but around the city. So these are all the places where the plants have been planned. Some of them are managed by the municipality. Some of them are self-organized and self-managed. They're all places that still host public debates around public space. And we kind of collect them, meaning that they are still under their networked We have relation with all of them. We collect the feedback still nowadays, and so on. I wanted to bring today one of the projects as well that we designed and built in the last years here in Connecticut. And it was a project that it came in the office. It's a refurbishment of a house, and we had to design also the furniture inside. And it was a project that arrived in the middle of pandemic. And so for us, it was a moment in which we saw a lot of small practices and industries suffering. And we understood that as a possibility to have an impact, economically speaking, on those small practices. And all actually started, and I want to acknowledge that here in the audience is Stefan Van Eden, who worked very closely with me in this project. So thanks, Stefan, for all the effort. And everything started with an anecdote. So we designed this chair, and the metallist suddenly told us, we designed with we wanted to make it easy to be built. So we designed it to use prefabricated metal structures. And suddenly the metallist asked us to build these metal grids by hand, so not industrially speaking. And he asked us to do that because it was very expensive to get them as an industrial element, but he had metal in his workshop. So for us, it was like suddenly all the kind of the pre-Assam economic relations were upside down. And we used that, suddenly we realized about the capacity of a construction detail to empower, economically speaking. So where the money goes. And with the agreement of the client, then from there on, we designed everything with cheap materials, but that had, in order to be installed, it demanded a lot of time. So chairs were designed to be covered by a lot of textile types, that some of them for summer, some of them are winter, some of them carefully crafted. So the value of them was these coverings. This was the also an idea of openness. It is embedded. And then we designed these lamps that we wanted to reflect the capacity of breathing glass and the form of the glass. So we work very closely with the glassmaker to set up these forms and to establish relation with the metallist, because the glass elements are just placed. There's not a screw, they're just placed on top the metal bar. So we established a conversation between the metallist and the glass blower. And at that time, talking was very important. So everything happened on WhatsApp, online, but we established these connections between between makers. And then the house was neo-colonial, extremely problematic. And so we work on how to acknowledge that, but so not erase it and leave traces of it, re-signifying it. We wrap things. We work with a carpenter, extremely skilled, textiles. And then this was the main floor that needed to be refurbished. And we use paper insulation to cover the penthouse space. And it's a type of insulation that breaks very easily because it's paper. So basically, it demands a lot of time to be built, caring for each. So the materiality was extremely cheap, but it got luxurious through time by making. And then again, the wrinkles, the mistakes were exposed as parts of the beauty of this process of making. I'm going to jump this one because I want to explain this. This is a gallery in Barcelona. And I want to explain porticos. That we got an invitation to design 5 minutes. Okay. We got an invitation to design a bookstore, a temporal bookstore for a book art fair in Frankfurt, in this museum porticus that is placed in this island. You access through the bridge, and the museum is just perceived like this. But it was very interesting when drawing it that we realized that there's a rowing club underneath, fully disconnected, fully invisible, and not accessible from above. So with this in mind, we also beautifully, we realized that the size of the museum was not related with the art inside, but rather with the boats below. So we thought that that was a beautiful story, and being aware, especially on these temporary elements, that what is important is to reduce as much as you can material consumes and environmental impact. We found that there was a huge opportunity to basically design the project just on this. So we asked the rowing club to let us 2 boats. It's not something easy to get because they're very valuable. And to connect both through the action of taking the boats outside and bringing them upstairs. And you might think that is a very simple thing, but it was very complicated. So the design ended up being an instructions of use of how to take out 2 boats and bring them upstairs. And the boats, as you can imagine, were laid down to hold the books. So everything was just a translation of materiality from one side to the other and a reignification of it. So we find out how to move out the boat. The boat needed to sail on the river and went few bridges down the river, go up, and then through the, then through the road, arrive to porticos. And these are the images of the bookstore. And then the last project. It's a performance that we work with Aymar Pérez Galí, is a choreographer. Aymar's work, he has done a lot of work around AIDS and the impact of AIDS on dance communities, especially on Spanish communities and Latin American communities in the 70s and 80s. In the 80s and 90s, where sweating started to be perceived as a dangerous liquid. And how had that an impact on dance spaces? For Aymar, sweating is a political agent or a tool to give voice to subaltern bodies. So he asked us to work around sweating, and he asked us also to come up with a scenography that would allow also gender not to be perceived. So he wanted to emancipate bodies. And with that in mind, we built a black box, basically a nonoscopic space, in which, as you see, it was tilted, so you would enter without knowing, and it produced a lot of disorientation. And what we did that it was impossible to see was a ceiling that was hanging above, and it moved during the performance. In this performance, there were 4 dancers that you could not see, but sense through humidity and sweating. And people would merge themselves through the change of temperature and humidity by the fact that the ceiling was moving down. So you would not see, but you would feel. And for us, I wanted to finish with this project. Maybe I should put a little bit of techno, just to give you a sense of the feeling of it. So we wanted to finish with this project because for us, architecture is not what it is, but what allows to be. And in this project, when actually one of the senses could not be there, and the other one, the scopic one, the other ones emerge. And suddenly, imagination allows us to think beyond that. And we felt that that's actually the strength of architecture. Thank you very much.
I look at things.
Thank you so much, Hannah. What a wonderful presentation. I love your focus on wrinkles. You talked a couple of your projects, you're talking about wrinkles, you're talking about, choosing the terrazzo material that already looks as if it has a million marks on it, so that when you draw something, it just becomes part of, this larger scheme. So I love how you're talking about that, and talking about, architecture being something that supports life, that supports changes in life, whether it's the duration of a dance performance or the duration of several generations of people living in housing. And I also love, the jumping back and forth in your presentation between, your contemporary, the work that you're doing, your historical research, and showing us through the way that you set up your presentation how this all comes together. And I was curious, I introduced the Kitchenless City as a feminist project, and you emphasized that when these buildings are being built, it's developers, right, who think this is a good idea economically, right, to produce flexible housing, to have these kinds of schemes. And so I'm curious if you could talk more about the relationship between the more social ideas that you're interested in and economics, like where there's alignment, where we see this, what I see as a feminist project that comes from, an economic goal, and where there's a fight. So where are you seeing those alignments or misalignments in your work?
I think fight is positive. So, one of the things that it's the first lecture, yesterday was the first lecture that I showed images of our buildings inhabited. We denied to show them inhabited or to use bodies because we have, as architects, or in our discipline, it has been overused, the image of bodies in architectural photography, to prove how good we are. We are doing well, right? People is happy in our housing buildings and so on. And conflicts, especially when working collective housing, is part of the deal. So, as in a society. So, and I would say that in terms of budgets or economies is exactly the same. And struggles do happen in private developments and in public developments. Obviously, when you work on public housing, the awareness of it is higher. But I would say the struggle is the same.
The struggle is the same, but say more. What are more of the differences in your experience of what's possible when you're working in a public context versus a private one?
What a question. Somebody could help me here. It's I think it's different because, obviously the first private housing that we built, the client, the developer, saw on it certain values. We saw others. So I would say that when working with private developments, our private developer didn't talk about social inclusion or gender inclusion. It was us talking about it. But for him, the values were others. And I think this is very important, both ways. I know that you're pushing me to make them different, but I don't see them that different.
It's okay if it's the same. I'm just curious. Okay. And I think it's so phenomenal that you were talking about the post-occupancy evaluations and how, you know, what comes up in one project feeds into the next one. And you said something about helping someone to hang a TV. Is that right? So if you can talk more about what was surprising in that.
So, look, now I'm going to answer to the previous question. And I have to thank Jacob Moore for this, because we were talking right before the lecture about the value of building public housing or private housing. And in Barcelona, to build for private developers is not well perceived. So one of actually proofs is that 110 rooms had a huge impact, luckily, you know, and we were very happy of it, but it never got an award. Never, ever. And hardly published. So then suddenly the social housing came in. We got the national award. It's extremely prestigious because we're doing social housing. So it has a prestigious that's why, among other reasons, we are so proud of that building, even if it's kind of ugly in a way and aged and difficult because in an industrial context, but we are extremely proud because we are operating in a context in which social housing is the most prestigious thing that you can do. And we were talking about how that operates different in different territories. So here my question to you. How would you describe the situation here in New York?
Can I speak a little bit more broadly? I think it's I think contrary to what might be the dominant mood, I'm very excited about what's going on with social housing in smaller ways in the United States. Maybe y'all know, just in Seattle the other week, they voted to pass legislation to fund the Social Housing Authority by taxing rich businesses like Microsoft, and this was by a 25% margin. And this is following a vote to form the Social Housing Authority. Maybe some of you live in Brooklyn and know about the Empire State Development project that's happening on Fulton that will produce permanently affordable, super green, probably senior housing. So I think we've gotten to the point in this country where it's extremely clear that business as usual is working for people who are making a lot of money off of the housing system, but it's not working to house us. So I'm very, very encouraged by moves in Seattle, Rhode Island, what's happening in New York, Montgomery County, Maryland. So community land trust all over the place, much more interest there, and the role that design can play in producing excellent homes for people. So I'm feeling pretty excited, but I don't think it's the same at all with in terms of social housing having a higher status than private development. I would say that's we're not there yet necessarily, except in some small corners.
I think we have to learn from each other.
Okay,
in Spain, private development needs to be revalued and not poorly seen, and maybe the other way around in this case.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm curious, I just had one sort of silly question. I'm wondering, when you are visiting these collective kitchens, do people let you cook with them? How does that work?
Uh, yes, of course.
Okay, no, I don't know.
No. Yeah, and I appear actually in a lot of images. It's just that I age a lot in these last years, but I'm that one cooking in most of them. And actually, yes, it became a very important tool to establish conversations. If you don't cook and eat, you're not part of it. So it was very difficult when I visited several in one day because I had to finish my meals, sometimes 3 in a row. But it's a way to establish a relation and a bonding that when working with collectives and communities is essential. So with the domestic workers project, for instance, I already had worked with domestic workers unions before, and it took me 3 years to establish some sort of trust, and that's crucial. Yes.
3 years. Wow. Yeah, that's amazing. So that's why you've been working on it for 14 years, because it's human connection. Yeah, I think it's so phenomenal that you've been so dedicated to this important project. And I'm also wondering if you could tell us more. I mean, you weren't speaking today about, I mean, except in some smaller ways, about your academic work, but I'm curious to know, what does it mean to be a professor of architecture and care?
Actually, we have a group, a WhatsApp group that well, I'm saying WhatsApp now, we are not in WhatsApp anymore. We move, but let's say a group, communication group that we joke a lot about the term care because it's been like pink washing or green washing, and now it's care washing. And every week and every season there's care. But when we started, we thought about it a lot, and we decided to keep it because it's actually what we have been working around and what we will work about in the coming years. So we hope the wave it's going to be of help and not and it's going to support research and work around these topics. But when it goes the wave, we will keep on working around it.
Right, exactly. No, I was trying to say that in the introduction that, this has become a popular word, but it's obviously extremely authentic in your work. And how much time do we have now? One more? Okay, great. So, yeah, what's something else you want to talk about? Let me see. Maybe you'll think of something while I'm looking at this. I'm curious, you've been working on the Kitchenless City for 14 years. Do you think you'll keep working on it for another 14? What's the future?
I moved to aging a lot due to the fact that the chair that it's at ETH, it's linked, it's in between the architecture department and an engineer department that addresses disabilities through robotic and engineering. It's an odd match, but we love each other. I would never do what they do, and they would never do what I do. So we are a perfect marriage. So that's why, naturally speaking, I started working around aging, and that's why I talk a lot about aging, because we understand aging from not only the sociological and economic perspective, but also material and a spatial perspective. So we work in the chair that is a lab on materials and aging. We start understanding how a construction detail has to show not only a momentum of building, but a momentum of a past and a future of that material and everything around it. So, yes.
I look forward to that. So we'll turn it now to the audience. There's a microphone here. I invite the person with the first question and maybe the second to line up behind them to approach the microphone to ask a question for our distinguished guest. Who's first?
Yes, hello. My name is Asa. I'm a first-year architecture student at the Cooper Union. And earlier in your presentation, I remember you mentioned how you had a plan, or you were displaying a plan, and you said how legally it's considered a 2-bedroom space, but in function, it's a 3-bedroom space, or it could be. And I was interested in, how do you go about navigating design decisions that you know are not going to be like presented that way to public? Like, how do you go about navigating and confirming within your design that the space is going to be utilized the way you want it, even though you know it's not going to be presented or shown in that way?
Very interesting question. When working with time, we have been always obsessed with time, precisely because we have a tendency in architecture to encapsulate projects in a short period of time, meaning we start designing and we finish construction. And the reality is very different. Even the process is very different. Not everything is on our control. We form part of a large conversation, very complex conversation. Architecture is collective. That's why it's deeply problematic when in architectural schools, and I'm part of that team, let's say, when we ask students to design alone, because that never happens, and it will never happen in the future, in your future, if you're designing alone. So architecture is always a conversation, and decisions are not fully on you, never are fully on you. So it's not on how we expected things to happen. Obviously, you project things, but with that in mind, we have always designed openings. So we want to understand when our spaces as openings. And if they are transgressed, the better, because that's precisely because the open nature of it. So, thank you for a very smart question.
Anyone else?
And let's get the mic to this nice person.
Thank you. Very nice to see you, Anna.
Nice to see you. Nelson.
Could you speak more about your experience communicating with the residents after the public housing development? I think that's the feedback loop in architecture. I feel like doesn't quite exist as much, because architects design a building and you walk away. You might just hear about it from the press. But I think that feedback loop doesn't exist before design, especially if you're not collectively designing with the community. Maybe you are, and that's great. But the pose is always very interesting. So how was that experience, and
one of the most difficult ones in my career, I would say. First, because I felt that inhabitants, as I was mentioning, they're very diverse, and social gatherings and collectives are complex, and violence and conflict is part of their nature. But I am deeply in love, both the private client that we work with in the 110 rooms, it's an amazing developer. I'm deeply in love with the way he thinks things, but also the public housing department. I am so proud of the public housing department. We have 3 types, and the other 2 are not interesting at all. And this one, it's thanks to, among other people, but there's an important figure that is called Josep Maria Borrell, that I named because one day I hope you are able to listen to one of his talks, that he's an architect and jumped into the public site like 15 years ago, I think. And 10 years ago, he started to push changes in the public housing department. And it's not easy. It's not easy anywhere. And he could manage to include social inclusion in the calls. So he has done an amazing job. And he's always there in all meetings with inhabitants. So you see this very important figure in architecture, in a room with all inhabitants that protest a lot. So it was not, I didn't take it personal. It was more than I felt that this housing department is doing good. It's doing really good. But then you have to understand then I learned one very important thing through time. As soon as I was stepping out of the room, we were going for drinks. And everyone was super happy with the housing, and I was like, look, fuck, I was like fighting, you were fighting and screaming as hell because of the ramp and blah, 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 and because of that plug, blah, blah, blah. You step out of the room and you tell me that you're the happiest person in earth because you got this apartment. And you realize that there are different ways of asking things. And there's one way that is very particular, that is like screaming and shouting out loud. Because if you don't shout out loud, you don't get things done. And that's kind of also a tendency. And it's a good thing to know when working in public participation, that it is you can face somebody asking something very politely or not, but they both have the right to speak, and they're not being personal. And probably they all love the apartments.
Hands over here. Yeah.
Hi, I'm really inspired by your Kitchenless City project, and I have a question, which is, in a say very highly diverse city, for example, New York City, what that kitchen looks like might differ like tremendously from this unit to the next unit. And I know this because I have friends who are like, oh, all I need is like an electric stove, and I have friends who are, I mean, me included, I'm like going for that gas stove, and I need that walkie, I'm like Chinese, I need a wok. And then there are like, when my parents visit, they're like, oh, this is like a fake air duct, like it's not even real ventilation, how are you gonna make anything that's like, how are you gonna cook a steak? You're gonna have your fire, everybody's requirements tremendously different. And how do you navigate when you were doing that project? What do you decide what goes in a kitchen, or what is a kitchen even? Yeah.
I think it's precisely, I love the question, because it's precisely what we are so uncomfortable with is the normativization and the normalization. Is that a word exists to say normal? This is normal. What normal means, and what normal means in cooking. So we have inherited a way of doing housing that assumes that we all live equally and we cook in the same way. The typology that I showed is not, again, we are not claiming that that's the new normal. That shouldn't be the new normal. What we're claiming is that we need wider diversity of housing types that can answer to the complex social structures that we have. And I'm talking about Barcelona, but I think we could pair it very easily with the New York situation. So yes, I fully agree. I live in 36 square meters. I don't remember how many feet, but it's very small. And my kitchen area it was just an electric element. I love cooking, don't take me wrong, but I'm a simple person. And I have now one of these machines that I love that cooks everything. And I have a small window to ventilate. So yeah, that answers to my kitchen is not a normal one.
Amazing. I think we have time for one more question.
Hi, Anna. And I think you knew I was going to ask a question. So
He's Stefan.
yeah. Hi, everyone. I was really touched by the last kind of your last statement in the lecture, because you basically said that architecture is not what it is, but what it allows to be. And for me, that means that the generosity of architecture is that it allows for something to happen. And then their agency as architects is about how to define that limit, you know? So how do we know when we're doing too little or too much as architects?
That's a very difficult question. Thank you for that. No, no, I would say, and more, Stefan, because we work together in one project, you know, that it's not all on us or not on me. So everything is a collective decision. And luckily, as we're always working collectively, when you do too much, somebody calls you out. And I think that's fantastic. So I hope that answers your question.
Okay, well, thank you so much to all of you for coming into the League for hosting this event. And please join me in thanking our speaker tonight, Anna Puigjaner.